On Wednesday, before we start, on Wednesday there was a couple of questions that were asked that I could not answer. Uh, I was hoping David would be here with his wife because he asked one of the questions, and that was where or how do demons get inside the human body, into a body? The other question, Jeanette asked it or made comment towards it, was when was the last casting out of demons performed? And I'm going to address that one first. We know in Matthew 10 and 1 that Jesus gave his disciples, 12 disciples, authority and power to cast out unclean spirits. In Acts 16, if you'd like to turn there with me, Acts 16. Beginning in verse 16, we're talking about Paul here. It reads like this. Now it happened as we went to prayer that a certain slave girl possessed with a spirit of divination met us. And that means being able to tell the future. Who brought her masters much profit by fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and us and cried out, saying, These men are the servants of the Most High God, who proclaim to us the way of salvation. And this she did for many days. But I like this. But Paul, greatly annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out that very hour. So we have that example as one of the last ones. We know that Philip cast out unclean spirits in Acts chapter 8 in verse 7. And as far as I can tell, and I don't know if anybody else went to studying on that particular question, that when the apostles were gone, that was it. Galen. Yes. Yes. And so that was the end of it at that time. As far as the last recorded one, as far as what I could find, was Paul doing this to that girl who was able to tell fortune teller. Any thoughts or comments on that? Okay, I wish the second one was just as easy as the first one. How do demons enter into the body was asked the question. Bottom line is, I don't know. The Bible does not specifically address that of how. I think it's important if we understand kind of a little bit about demons, where they came from. You know, they're fallen angels. And let's turn over to Revelation, the 12th chapter. In Revelation, the 12th chapter, beginning in verse 7. And remember, Revelation is I don't know about you, but it's one of the most difficult books for me to understand. It's apocalyptic. Yeah, hard word to say there. It's metaphorical. It's extremely symbolic. And so it's sometimes difficult to understand it. But in verse 7, it says, A war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon is the devil here, or Satan. And the dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. Now, if you go back up to verse 3 of chapter 12, 3 and 4 says this, And another sign appeared in heaven, behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. This is symbolic, what I read and studied, of about a third of the angels rebelled in heaven against God with Satan, and about a third of them were cast out. That's quite a few. I don't know the number. It doesn't ever say when that happened, but it did. The next question you may ask yourself is, when did God create angels? You ever thought about that? Any thoughts to that? Well, I'll tell you, it's tricky, because trying to determine when God created the angels is somewhat difficult, because anything God did before the foundation of the world puts the event outside of time itself. Okay? Time and space are characteristics of our world, not God's. He is not limited by hours, days, or years as we are. In fact, the Bible tells us that with the Lord, a day is like what? 1,000 years. And 1,000 years is like one day. We do know that God created the angels before He created the physical universe. Okay? The book of Job describes the angels worshiping God as He was creating the world. In Job, the 38th chapter, verses 4 through 7, it says this: "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched the measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy." Now, if we consider the functions of angels, what are they? Messengers. Okay? Ministering, yeah. Hebrews 1:4 talk about they were created for ministering spirits to serve those who will inherit salvation. We know that they existed prior to the Garden of Eden, because Satan, who was formerly the angel Lucifer, was already present in the garden in his fallen state. But we know, however, another function of angels was to worship God around His throne. Revelation 5:11 through 14 says that. So they may have existed millions of years, as we reckon time, before God created the world. We don't know. We just don't know. But that's what we do know. Now, that being said, those fallen angels, there's a number of worldly views on this. Not right now, because it would take us about 2 months to study this. When you get time, read Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4, and everything you can find out about that. There are some people who believe that the angels of God, as it says in Job, and as it says in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, the angels of God, the sons of God. The sons of God are angels. And what these sons of God do in Genesis chapter 6 doesn't make sense for being holy angels. Maybe they're the fallen angels. I just don't know. It's not clear. Burton Kaufman, in his commentary, absolutely, without hesitation, says that the sons of God in this Genesis 6 and every place else are not angels. And he throws up a pretty good explanation of it, of why. So if you have a computer at home, look up Burton Kaufman's commentaries on studylight.org, I think is a good place to go. And he goes at like 3 or 4 pages of why that's not right. So that's one theory, that these fallen angels had sexual relations with the beautiful women And that was how demons got into people. Okay? Another thought is kind of like bacteria. You breathe it in, spores in the air, they're spirits. That was the theory. So I cannot find a good answer. I just think it's as good as answer as any. Think of them like Casper the Friendly Ghost, who just goes through people. That's how he enters them. We know that they enter man and they can enter animals when we talk about the pigs. So, are there any questions or thoughts on that? Yes, Toby. Yeah. Yeah. That's right. But who's to say, I'm just throwing this out. Remember in Sodom and Gomorrah, they wanted those two angels that were men to come in and have sexual relations with them. So, we don't know what they were capable of doing. Now, but I agree. I mean, I don't think we'll ever know. And I don't think we need to get wrapped up around it. Yeah. Yeah. He did. If God wanted us to know about it, if it was important for us to know about it, it would have been included in the Bible someplace. Wayne, you had a comment? Or yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Amen. Toby. No, no, that's good. It is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the New Testament, where it talks about the sons of God, for example, Romans 8 and 14. For as many as are led by the Spirit of God, these are the sons of God. And there's other scripture, 1 John 3:1, Galatians 4 and 6. So, all that being said, it's not something, I mean, it makes for some deep conversation at lunchtime with my son. I mean, we have a good time discussing stuff like this. But anyway, I don't know if that clears it up, makes it more confused, or what. But is there any last thoughts on that? Right. That's right. Well, and think about, I mean, demons are limited in their power. Okay? Job tells us that. Remember, God told Satan, you can do whatever you want, but you cannot lay a hand on Job. So they're limited. Even when the demons came out of the man and went into the pigs, they had to get Jesus' permission to do that. So they're not all powerful. They possess a lot. In fact, we know that there can be more than one demon in a person. Look at Mary Magdalene. She had, I think it was 7. Well, she was having a bad day. I mean, when you think about it. They inflict mental disease. And there's scripture to back all this up. Physical infirmities, muteness, deformity, blindness, erratic behavior, all those. So they can really mess up somebody. Any last thoughts? Okay, good. Thank you. All right, now let's get back to where we left off. We have been talking about Jesus setting up his base of operations in Capernaum. Just in the way of review, Capernaum was a logical place for this. It was ideally located for his travels, situated on the Sea of Galilee. It was at a point where many important roads came together. Capernaum was also a wise place from which Jesus could minister because it was the most densely populated part of Palestine. And this was even backed up by the Jewish historian Josephus when he said there was 240 villages and towns in the area, none of which had a population of less than 15,000. They were multinational. Galilee of the Gentiles, we read about. So from this time on, during his Galilean ministry, Christ would never be gone long from Capernaum. He would go out, leave, do his tour, come back, always. Then we jumped over to, in Roper's book, to the healing of the demonic in the synagogue. This is what we're just talking about. One of the things that we pointed out that the people who saw this were absolutely astonished. They were amazed. That word amazed is the same thing that was used to describe Mary's and Joseph's reaction when they finally found Jesus in the temple when he was 12. They were specifically amazed at his authority by which he spoke. He was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Now, we said that was not a dig or a put down on the scribes. Scribes had their function. They were translating the Bible into different languages. They knew the law. They could draft legal documents, legal beagles, as we called them in the Marine Corps. But Jesus astonished those present in the synagogue by teaching, not only his teaching, but by his actions. The wording in Luke 4:32 through 36, I just want to highlight this, shows that Jesus was acting as the Spirit-empowered anointed one of God. He could command spirits to come out. We know that uncleanness in the Old Testament was the opposite of holiness. Leviticus 11:44 talks about that. We've already said that the synagogue was an ideal place for Jesus to preach and teach. After the scriptures were read, the synagogue official would call on somebody who he deemed was qualified to comment on the passages. And it was during this time that the silence was interrupted by the demon yelling out in a loud voice, verse 33. I made a comment. It's interesting to note that liberal scholars deny the demon possession of Christ's day, saying that physical illness was attributed to evil spirits by superstitious people. But however, Luke, as I call the good doctor, made a distinction between those with physical illnesses and those afflicted with unclean spirits, or those possessed by demons. Their reactions coming out of people were violent. We read about that. Finally, the spirit did come out and did no harm. Next, we moved on to discussing the healing of Peter's mother-in-law in Capernaum. 3 of the 4 Gospels discuss this, all 3 pretty much the same. One thing we know for sure from all three Gospels is that Peter was married. We talked about that. Been hard for him to been the first pope. Jesus appears to have made Peter's home his center of operations after leaving Nazareth. Just trying to figure out what I want to cover here. We talked about Peter's mother having a fever. Now, fevers are dangerous in themselves. I mean, we don't think of it sometimes as that. We think of it as a symptom of something else. You got the flu, you probably have a fever, maybe, But fevers back in those days were kind of a disease by itself. There was malaria, Malta fever, which caused weakness, anemia, wasting away, even to death. Intermittent fever may have been like typhoid fever. We talked about the degrees when you have to really get worried. High fever is 103 or higher. A dangerous fever, 104 or higher. And fever is 105, you need to seek medical attention. And fevers of 108 or more usually result in, death, convulsions and death. Matthew says he touched her hand and the fever left. Mark says Jesus raised her up, taking her by the hand, and the fever left her. Luke says Jesus rebuked the fever and it left her. In all three accounts, she got up and she attended to her guest. It was immediate. There was no recovery time. Pretty amazing. And we see that the whole city knew about this. People were bringing everybody to Jesus. Well, they gathered at the front door. We talked about why they waited till sundown. Because of the Sabbath ending at sundown. And they did not want to violate the prohibition about carrying a burden on the Sabbath. Okay, I think we're caught up pretty good, and I know we don't have much time, but let's start and turn our attention to Jesus' first teaching and healing tour in Galilee. Okay? Early that next morning, Jesus went outside of Capernaum to a secluded place to pray, it says. Notice how Mark describes it in chapter 1, verse 35. He says, in the early morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went away to a secluded place, and was praying there. There is, when you really look at this, so much meaning in this picture. Though he was divine, he needed to be alone with his Father. Don't we have a similar need? We certainly do. Why do you think he chose the early morning, still being dark out? Any thoughts on that, Galen? His mind was fresh. He was well rested. Okay? Good possibility. Not as likely to have that big crowd that was following him. Any other ideas? Yeah, great way to start the day. And that's what I have here. Probably more than anything, Jesus wanted to start the day off right. Talking, praying to his Father. The prayer life of Christ was extensively stressed by the sacred writers. Luke tells us in 6:12 he continued all night in prayer. Any other thoughts on that? Yes. That's true too. Where to go next? Yes, very possibly. Very possibly. Okay. Mark says that Simon Peter and his companions searched for him. Luke says the crowds were searching for him. And why were they searching for him? Oh, yeah. They didn't want him to stop healing. They did not want Jesus to leave. And think about it. Blame him? No. No way. But notice Jesus' response both in Mark and in Luke. What did he say? Yeah, he said, let us go. And then he says, I must go to the other towns and cities so that I can preach. And here's the reason. This is my purpose. This is the reason I was sent here. And he did so. Let's turn to back to Matthew 4, if you would. And again, read 23 through 25. Now Jesus went about all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing all kinds of sickness and all kinds of disease among the people. Then his fame went throughout all Syria, and they brought to him all sick people who were afflicted with various diseases and torments, and those who were demon-possessed, epileptics, and paralytics, and he healed them. And great multitudes followed him from Galilee and from Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and beyond Judea. Or beyond the Jordan, I'm sorry. Beyond the Jordan. He was. That's right, all the time. Now, in there in verse, the last part of 25, where it talks about Decapolis, was a district beyond the Jordan, which, in keeping with the meaning of its Greek name, was comprised of 10 cities. Deca is meaning 10. And if you think about our Olympics, we have an event called the decathlon, composed of 10 events. That's where that comes from. Now, at its longest and widest points, the province of Galilee was about 63 miles by 33 miles. That's over 2,000 square miles. It encompasses several hundred towns. So we see that the tour must have taken probably several months. We read a moment ago Matthew's account on the success of the tour. Though Matthew speaks of Jesus' tour throughout all Galilee, Luke, in chapter 4 of 44, says he kept on preaching in the synagogues of Judea. Wait a minute. Judea, Samaria, Galilee. Okay, in this verse, Judea evidently does not refer to the province of Judea, but to the entire countryside or country of Palestine. A New American Standard explains Judah as the country of the Jews. Country of the Jews. Any thoughts, comments? Yes, Mark. Yep. Yeah. The word would travel very fast throughout all the Central Valley here and beyond. Yeah. It would be absolutely incredible. Yeah. Well, think about it for a minute. You ever thought about problems that a church would love to have? Yeah. Not enough chairs in the auditorium. Oh, great. Yeah. Running out of communion cups. Okay. Not enough parking spaces out in the area. I mean, those are problems churches like. But yeah, Mark. Yeah, we need more bathrooms. All right, let's turn our attention for 10 minutes or so to Jesus' healing of the leper. Now we'll be going back and forth between Matthew chapter 8 and Mark 1 and Luke 5. I'm gonna again call on some people to read if you don't mind. If you'd rather not, just shake your head. Know that you would not like to read. Wayne, would you read Matthew 8, 2 through 4 here in a minute? Jack, would you take Mark 1, 40 through 45? Jan, would you mind taking Luke 5, 12 through 16? Okay. Wayne, go ahead, please.
I will be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them.
Thank you. Jack, Mark 1 through 1:40 through 45.
With leprosy came to Jesus, imploring him and kneeling down, saying to him, you are willing, you can make me clean. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out with his hand and touched him, and said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. And immediately the leprosy left him, he was cleansed. And he sternly warned him, and immediately they sent him away. And he said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for yourself cleansing, as Moses commanded in the Testament.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, through 45.
Spread the news around to such extent that Jesus could no longer publicly enter the city, but stayed out in unpopulated areas. They were coming to him from everywhere.
Okay, thank you. And then Jan, Luke 5, please. Thank you. Thank you all. It's interesting that one miracle on the preaching tour in Galilee is recorded in detail, the healing of the leper. Okay? As you could see, all three Gospels were pretty close in what they said. Leprosy was one of the most dreaded diseases of the ancient times. Okay? If not the most dreaded. Leprosy was the scourge or torment of humanity in that day. Leprosy bacteria was discovered in an Egyptian mummy. Medical experts are divided as to whether biblical leprosy is the same as the modern day Hansen's disease, it's called. And we'll talk about that in more detail. Leprosy is still rampant in some undeveloped countries. And victims of this dreaded disease are still outcast from society. Leprosy is transliterated from a form of the Greek word lepra, which means one with a serious skin disease. Remember, we said that medical experts are divided as to whether biblical leprosy is the same as modern day Hansen's disease. Hansen's disease is the disease that causes facial deformity, the rotting away of body extremities, fingers, toes, ears, tip of the nose, things of that nature. We don't know that in this case which one it may have been, but we do get a clue from the good Dr. Luke. Okay? Matthew and Mark's accounts say that a leper came to Jesus. Notice in Luke, he says that a man covered with leprosy came to him. And it sounds like, from Luke's account, he was in the advanced stages of leprosy. Now, question, what would that mean? Probably going to die? Advanced? Falling apart. Yeah, his skin was sloughing off or falling off. He may have been missing those toes and fingers we talked about partly. Tips of his nose gone. It certainly would not have been a pretty sight, as you can imagine. Now, think about it for a moment. We can only imagine the astonishment of the multitude when the leper approached Jesus and bowed before him in worship. And the reason is, this was because lepers were supposed to isolate themselves and avoid contact with the rest of the population. Turn with me to Leviticus chapter 13. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. I started getting into it, and I thought, "Oh, I got to come back to this a little bit later." Uh, but in Leviticus 13, verses 45 and 46, says, "Now the leper on whom the sore is, his clothes shall be torn and his head bare. And he shall cover his mustache and cry, Unclean, unclean. He shall be unclean. All the days he has the sore, he shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. His habitation shall be outside the camp." They didn't want nothing to do with him. Wayne.
Responsibility of determining the different stages of the disease and exactly what to do with the time. And somehow he gave the priest the ability to determine based upon whether the hair was white in a certain area or whatever, whether the disease was being cured or coming back. Very, very, very interesting.
It is. It's an eye opener. It truly is. Other comments? Yes, Galen. Yeah. I don't know. Be something to look into. They talk about, lepra being a skin disease. Well, think about other skin diseases: eczema, psoriasis, ringworm. Okay. I mean, there's probably people in here, me, when I had broke my heel and I was in a cast for 2 months, and when they took that cast off, my skin looked terrible, and it got infected, and I got cellulitis, and then it went to eczema, and so anyway, it happens, and we have modern medicine today that will help treat it, but they didn't have that back then. It's interesting. Yes, John. Yeah. Great. If not, yeah, yeah. It's they didn't have much to do with them, and it was very, very contagious. Notice in all three gospel accounts, after the leper approached Jesus, bowed before him, or fell to his knees, depending upon which gospel you're looking at. Notice what all three say. If you are willing, you can make me clean. I want us to study that statement a little bit more in depth. If you are willing, what does that mean? If it's in your will, okay. Do you want to do it? Would he be asking, can you do it? No. No, he was not doubting or expressing any doubt in Jesus' ability. He was only questioning the Lord's willingness to perform a miracle on his behalf, when you think about it. And what did he ask? He said, you can make me clean. Why did he say that instead of, you can make me healed? Ooh, good question. Exactly. That's right. People's understanding of skin diseases had two consequences. First, these afflictions were often seen as having been sent by God as punishment for sin, and that only God could heal such a condition. And second, because those with skin diseases were deemed, as Wayne just said, unclean. They were religious and social outcasts from the community to prevent the spread of this ritual uncleanness. The growing first century Jewish preoccupation with issues of clean and unclean made this situation worse in the times of Jesus. My last comment before we close is evidence that the primary issues in the story were ritual cleanness and isolation is backed up. And remember this, in fact, that the man, he was not taken to Jesus by anyone, was he? Yeah. Everybody else carried the paralyzed and the other people brought him. But he went by himself because nobody wanted to touch him. I mean, boy. Any last comments before we close? Great class. Thank you so much. We'll pick up from there.